Hi, and welcome to Beyond the First Response. This is Christy Lister, and I'm here with Robyn Michael, my co-host, and our special guest, Dr. Calvin Parie. How are you today?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you for coming on. Hopefully I said your last name correctly.
You did. That was really good. That's usually doesn't happen. That's really good.
I'm going to go play the lotto. Too bad that somebody won, though.
Yeah, and it wasn't me. I know it was in California, but it wasn't me.
I have a better chance now of winning, right?
Yeah.
So, do you prefer to go by doctor or Calvin?
I like Cal. Cal is good.
Cal? Okay.
That's you can leave the doctor out there.
Okay, perfect. So we're excited to have you because we know that you had a long conversation with one of our first H.E.L.P board members. And this is always a hot topic for me anyways, to whether or not EAPs work. But before we get started on that, Robyn, do you have our icebreaker?
So this is all just very last minute, and I'm just going to choose one of my favorite ones. We did a Halloween one last time, but my favorite one, because I'm out right now and my son is going nuts because this is his snack. What is your favorite breakfast cereal?
Favorite breakfast cereal. It's got to be Captain Crunch.
That's
Crunch
my
berries.
son's too. Crunch berries.
Oh yeah,
He's so mad at me. That's like his after school snack. I know, parent of the year over here, but I mean,
it is the best, you know.
But it rips up your gums.
I know.
Yeah,
it's really, really, it has a weird texture to it.
Yeah.
But it does taste good.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. It rips up your gums.
It does. That's my excuse for not eating it. Really, I will just continue to eat it when it does, but you know.
No, if I had some cinnamon toast crunch, I'll just eat that. I'll eat a whole box of it, not even with any milk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My son-in-law's favorite.
So the little things that we learn.
Yeah, I know. It's very important.
So Cal, you work a lot with EAPs, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So we all have different opinions, I think, of EAPs. I'm not really quite sure what Robyn's opinions are on them, but and maybe it's because we misunderstand them. We're not educated on what they can actually do for us or for first responders. So, Robyn, you have a question?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, just on a positive side, like I come from corporate America and I used the EAP a couple of times. First time was when my daughter was stillborn and having some issues, and used it actually a few times. Another time was to get some marriage counseling. And then the third time I tried to use it, I ran up against a problem that I hear a lot of people say where counselors were booked. I couldn't get into anybody, or they no longer took the specific insurance anymore. So it was more of administrative problems, I think. And actually that third time I never did see anybody. And it was something to do with my husband's spiraling. I had pretty much had a breakdown at work over everything. And anyway, overall, from a non-first responder community viewpoint, it served its purpose until it didn't. But I'm curious to know, I know for Eric, one thing, when I did call that third time, and not to overtake everything, but one thing he said to me was, why would you do that? Because now it's going to be on your HR file that you have a mental health problem, that there's something wrong with you. So at the time I didn't understand what he was talking about, but now knowing more about his department and the stigma attached around mental health, in his mind, EAP meant you're going to get put in disciplinary action. So anyway, I know that you oversee an EAP, so this is kind of we kind of jumped right into the deep end.
We sure did, didn't we?
Don't mean to put you on the spot.
Welcome to the jungle.
Yeah, just introduce yourself, and I know you and Joe had a really long conversation, so I'd love to hear about that.
No, I love it. I love the question. My doctorate is actually in public health with a focus on EAPs, occupational psychology, and that was my dissertation, and so I've worked in this field for a long time, and I've also worked for some of the large, box EAPs, like the Aetnas and RFLs of the world. I've done that, and I've also worked with smaller regional EAPs, and I've been in senior positions. So I've done the gamut, when it comes to this field, and I think like anything, not all EAPs are alike, and that's the biggest takeaway that I've had over my years, because they're all so different. There's such a wide spectrum of EAPs, and there's not a national body that sort of regulates EAPs and what they can and can't do either. And so anyone could put a shingle out and say that they're an EAP. You could be a mom and pop counseling center that says I do an EAP, or you can be a big insurance company and be an EAP. So that's part of the challenge. And so for the consumer, for the wise consumer, boy, it's important to know what to look for in an EAP, and how to buy an EAP. What are the do's and don'ts, and how do you find one that's good and effective? And that's I've been living this world for so long, and now I run this sort of regional EAP. We're just in Colorado. We just mainly are the EAP for the largest health system here, and then we have several municipalities and contracts, and so I like it. I like it because, again, we can flex and do the stuff that we want to do. But I'm also unique too, because in my world of EAP, I'm the son of a cop, and so I'm from Canada. So my father was a Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and so a situation that happened to him, because I was in the field of psychology and I was looking to become a Mountie, and what happened to him, I thought, I want to go into a different field. I want to go into the field of psychology, helping first responders, and so that makes me a little different. So I've always gravitated, anyways, to first responders and all the different EAP jobs that I've been in, because they're unique and different culture, and that's one of the things about EAPs. Each EAP is different, but each company and organization is different, so you got to treat them all differently and make sure that you do that.
And I think that's a very good point, because you come from a first responder family, so you understand those needs are different, where the majority, and this again is my experience, where the majority just hop on because, hey, I can be an EAP and I can get paid to do, see these people 4, 5, 6 times, be done, I'm paid, and move on, so to speak. Now, there is a difference. EAP is really, it provides a critical incident response in that moment. But can you explain the difference for our listeners, the EAP critical response versus a critical incident response debriefing?
Yeah, I think over the years, CISD, critical incident stress debriefing, they've evolved and changed over the years. I was, many years ago, when I was didn't have my gray hair, I was trained in the Mitchell model of incident response by Delta Airlines, but it's really changed over the years. And in most EAPs, the progressive EAPs have changed along with. And so when it comes to incident responses now, we use components of the Mitchell model, but we also use other components, such as engagement of leadership. We use psychological first aid. We use strength-based counseling. So we use different tools to help individuals, so we can customize an approach based on the response. So it's not your just standard, let's run out and assume everyone who was involved in it is going to suffer PTSD, and we need to get up there quickly and do a very rigid, structured debriefing or diffusing. That's just, we have too much data, we have too much experience over the years that just it's not an approach that is effective anymore. And so, we've, I've been a part of it, and we've evolved in how we work with hospitals, how we work with our first responders. We have a different approach in how we do incident responses. So it's not your traditional CISD.
So typically with an EAP, how many counselors or social workers can be built into your, and I know it's probably really generalized depending on the size of departments, size of companies, is there typically for a police department or a fire department?
Yeah. That's a good question, and it's interesting because different EAPs are different. For instance, I can give you an example of one of our large city contracts that we have of a city in Colorado. So they have us as their EAP for their officers who need support for non-work related issues. They have another group that they use for their officers who have work-related stress issues. They have a third group that does their incident responses and manages their incident responses. They have a fourth group, independent, that does their fitness for duties. And so, one of the things that I think different municipalities and city governments get upset about is when the organization goes out for a bid for an EAP, that they're either included partially in it or they're not included, and then the municipality contracts with an EAP and doesn't in any way consider when it comes to the first responders and their needs. And so they're scrambling to either figure out what that is, and sometimes it's an EAP that they don't want, or sometimes it's services that they don't want, and so then they have to go out and see if they can get up enough money or strategically work with the benefits people at that municipality, or get services that cover their needs. And so that's just sort of an outliner thing that I know municipalities get frustrated with. When it comes to an EAP such as an EAP I'm with, you have different levels of EAP specialists in an EAP like mine. I have a level of specialists who are called EAP specialists, who are master's level trained, licensed, but they're also trained in organizational psychology. They're trained in working with organizations. So they do management consultation on behavioral risk. They do incident responses. They do trainings. So they have a higher level of specialization, and those are my staff EAP folks. And so usually what I do is I have for a city government, I have two individuals who are EAP specialists that are assigned to that government. One is a clinical person and one is a non-clinical account manager. And then I have a group of contracted clinicians in the area who support all our accounts. And that can be a group, they're all licensed counselors. And then within that group of counselors in our network, you have subgroups. So you have a group of counselors who specialize in working with first responders. You have a group of counselors who specialize in working with physicians, a group of counselors who specialize in working with teachers. So you have subspecialties within that group too. And then you have a contractual relationship with telehealth counseling groups for easy access, because it's all about access when it comes to the real world of EAP. So we have contracts with a group called BetterHealth. And so folks can use my EAP specialists, they can use our contracted counselors, or they can go in and click on a website and go right in and see a BetterHealth counselor through texting or chatting or virtual counseling. So you have all these different options of counselors, and that's how we developed our model of an EAP.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's really robust.
Yeah.
Is that something that's just transpired over the last couple of years due to COVID? Were there issues gaps that needed to be filled that telehealth and the BetterHelp and all that kind of stuff filled in?
Yeah, Robin, I think it was the gaps. I think the pandemic really showed gaps in areas that EAPs needed to improve in. And so EAPs needed to improve in more tech options.
Right.
So meaning apps that can be used to access, meaning telehealth options, meaning continuing to expand your network. And so part of the thing we call them disruptors. And so there's disruptors that came into the field during the pandemics, the LERFs, the Gingers, the Talkspace, the Open Minds. I mean, all companies and some EAPs see that as a negative. We see it as an opportunity because there's a reason that they came into the field, because there are gaps.
Right.
And so it's looking at how you can continue to evolve and change. Because as an EAP, I tell my employees all the time, I don't want to be known as the I don't know if I can say this. I want to be known as the Kmart that never changed and adapted, because they go away. I want to be the Trader Joe's, the one that continues to
Target
and to grow and to figure out the market and to adapt and change. And there's a lot of us when it comes to the regional EAPs. We call us the progressive EAPs that really there's a group of us that really continue to adapt and change. But the larger you are as an EAP, the harder it is to adapt and change. And so some of the big box EAPs, they either haven't changed or they haven't adapted, and they give our EAPs a bad rap. so when you hear these terms like EAPs get 1 to 2% utilization or 5% utilization, or they're not confidential,
How often do municipalities change EAPs? So I'm in mortgages, so like every 5 to 7 years, people tend to refinance. So in my mind, you probably have a contract for a few years. Clearly it would be easier to stay with the same one, but do you find that they're, at least now with the mindset changing of our leadership, starting to change? Are they starting to look at different ones?
They are, and typically municipalities change because it's not necessarily the access to counseling, but it's the access to incident responses. It's the access to people who can consult on behavioral risk issues. I have an employee who's depressed or suicidal and need help. I have an employee who's making threats in the workplace. I need specialists to help me with that. And if these municipalities don't get those specialists through their EAP, or they get pushback on those things, they usually go out to bid more so than when it comes to if they don't have access to counseling. Now those have increased just because individuals are wanting more counseling, but those are usually the ones in which when I've been with large big box EAPs, when we would lose a municipality because we messed up on an incident response, or we weren't immediately accessible to help in those situations, which usually go right to the top.
Right. So the important thing, as you were saying, there's some that specialize, you kind of handpick some for EAPs for first responders, teachers, etc. Families. Often if the spouse is at home not working, they don't have access to any other EAP. So you're still putting a couple, although in my opinion, first responder families should see a first responder counselor, because you're serving with them. Are you able, if I called my EAP and I'm, an officer, I'm a dispatcher, I'm a records, whatever my position looks like, that's not upper management, am I able to call and kind of vet out what counselors are on my EAP? And what questions would I be asking them?
Right. You can say, when you call your EAP, you can say, I work in law enforcement, or I'm a firefighter, and so I would like a specialist who specializes in working with my population, or I would like someone who specializes in trauma, or I like someone who specializes in EMDR. I mean, you can say that when you call your EAP. and get those recommendations. Some EAPs, some progressive EAPs, they have a really good sort of screening process in which you can go through and you can answer certain questions, and then it spits out individual providers that have those specialties that are aligned with what the questions ask. And so there are some EAPs that have that tech piece. We have it on our partnership side with BetterHealth. But some EAPs, they just those questions. But it's imperative that when the first responder calls, that when they ask those questions and they say, I want a specialist. I want someone who works with first responders. I want someone who has trauma experience. Or if they're calling in and they have a relationship issue in their marriage, if they just call in and say, I'd like to have a marriage counselor, they're going to give them a marriage counselor because that's, you know, the number one issue that people call into their EAP for, are family and marital issues. But if they don't specify and say, I would like a marriage counselor, but one who works with first responders, if they can add that to it, then a reputable EAP will have subsets of providers that they can connect them with.
And that's something, I'm glad you said that, because I wish, and something that I really want to get across to our audience, family members that are listening, that if I could go back in time, the one thing I would do is just that. Understand that even though you're not the first responder, your spouse is, you are living that life, and a lot of the issues that you might be having might be coming from that first responder job. So I wish that I had known, not even done that, because I wouldn't have known to do that. That A, you have the ability to request that, and B, that you should be seeing counselors if your spouse is involved. And even if not, if you're going just for your own counseling, to see somebody who is culturally competent. Because after Eric died, the therapist that I saw that Kaiser recommended to me was a culturally competent therapist. And with just on the first session, he blew me away with all of the information that I had no idea had been a part of my life. So yeah, I wish that I had known that ahead of time.
And the other piece of that is some of the players who have come into the EAP field. So some of the tech companies that have come in, so they use coaches as opposed to licensed counselors.
Mm-hmm.
And so coaches just meaning that they're not licensed.
Yeah.
And when they talk about access, they can have greater access, but the greater access is because, 75% of the time you're going to see a coach, and that's going to be your person that's going to follow you through. So they're not a licensed counselor. Mm-hmm. So the other thing you can say is I want a licensed counselor. I want one who specializes and works with trauma and first responders. If I could get a list of those who I could be seen by.
So coaches are on EAPs now?
They're not on our EAP, but they are on other EAPs. And so some of the we call them the tech players that have moved into the field. They usually don't like EAPs, and so they're pretty negative of EAPs in their literature. And they also talk about greater access. And so, and that's good, but there's always a question, what does that mean by greater access? And typically with some of the big players that have come into the field, the greater access is I can get you in to see a coach, or I can steer you to a website and you can use one of our tech tools to help give you a webinar or an assessment that you can use. So it's a little different. You just have to be specific when you call and ask.
And I guess then that leads to my next question. So you have a licensed counselor on an EAP. You have connected and they've helped. Now EAP has stopped your free sessions. You can carry on, and insurance will still cover that. that's not happening with coaching, correct? Coaching is not covered under insurance.
Right, exactly right. Coaching is not, and so it's they don't get on insurance panels. And even when it comes to different EAPs, again, some EAPs, some of the providers that you can be seen by are individuals that are also going to be in your insurance panel. And most EAPs have a electronic medical record in which you can you can connect the individual with the specialist and also look at the company's insurance and make sure that if they complete their EAP sessions, they can then transition into insurance. But smaller EAPs don't necessarily have that technology. So even after they end their sessions, they might have to use that individual EAP professional to help them navigate to another professional that is within their insurance, which can be disruptive for some folks.
It can. And actually, it made me think Robyn's comment earlier when we first started about HR finding out, having that mental health note. They don't get to know who's actually calling. They just get numbers, correct?
That's right. And that's a big sort of myth out there. You know, we put out the myths of EAP. We put that out last year, and it was our most looked at article. and that's one of the big ones. You know, hey, if I use the EAP, does it get back to HR? Does it go on my record? All of that. And that is definitely a myth, because all EAPs that have licensed professionals, they're licensed by that state. And so they cannot disclose any of that information to anyone. And nor can it be in a report that has, PHI that can self-disclose someone. Mm-hmm. If they do, that's a violation of their license, and they can lose their license. And also, it's not very effective for the EAP. So that's an important piece, is EAPs are confidential in how we use them. But again, I can't speak for the coaches, because again, they're not licensed professionals. But I can say when it comes to an EAP, definitely they're confidential. And I have this discussion all the time with first responders, especially my folks in law enforcement, because coming from a law enforcement family, it's my father was a little more, I would say, suspicious than I was, but that's a trait of a law enforcement officer. I want that in a law enforcement officer. And so when we do orientations with law enforcement, we really go over when it comes to confidentiality, and we even bring a utilization report so they can see what that looks like. That goes to HR so they can see its data. And I also say this, I say as a law enforcement officer, it's so important that when you access the EAP, who you tell and who you don't tell, because you could tell just one person, and you could say, hey, I want you to keep this confidential, please, between you and me, just one person. And that person might keep it confidential, but someone might come to that one person and say, hey, I know that, Jill is really struggling, and I really hope she went to the EAP. And I know your friends come to you and ask if she went to the EAP. And you can say, hey, I can't say anything. It's confidential. And hold on. So she did come to you. And then you say, okay, I'll just tell you, but don't tell anyone else that she did come to me. I encouraged her to use it, and I know that she's using the EAP. So now the one person that Jill told knows, and now another person knows. So when she comes back into the workplace as an officer, and someone comes up to her, she didn't say, hey, did you use I heard you use the EAP, how is it? She's going to say, this is not confidential. So I tell that story all the time, because it's so important as to, you yourself, when you access that EAP, as to who you tell.
You took the thoughts right out of my head. Like, I mean, you said it. I was going to say it boils down to, it's against the law for a health professional to disclose any information, but it boils right back down to the stigma around mental health, the culture in these departments. And that's everywhere. It would be, I just recalling my incident at my job, like there were multiple people around witnessing it. So I'm sure it spread across the entire company, and I don't care. But as a first responder, of course, there's ego involved in everything. So, and you don't want your information out there, but that's just it. We like to talk to each other and we like to vent and we feel that we want to trust each other. But at some point we have to realize that I mean, there is that cultural issue going on in the departments, and utilize the peer support teams. I feel like that's where peer support comes in. If you need to talk to somebody about it, go to them, you know, and they can be kind of the liaison between the two.
Well, and they sign the non-disclosures, so they cannot be saying, well, yeah, you know, Joe went to
No.
EAP and I don't know, go ask him what he thought of it. And those are specifically signed, specifically trained peers to assure
Yeah.
that they are not, you know, playing the phone game
Yeah.
that so many humans
Sure.
tend to do.
And by the way, I'm a big supporter of peer support programs. Big supporter. I think that's the missing gap. I mean, municipalities, you know, when it comes to, not everyone needs to see an EAP. You know, if they have a peer support, that boy, that's amazing. Trained peer support who can acknowledge and listen and validate individuals, and just connect with them on a listening, supportive level. That goes so far, and that's such an important piece. There's a lot of apps, and we've explored them. A lot of companies out there that have peer support programs that individuals can access through you know, through a link, and we've explored some of them. There's some specifically for first responders, and so there are some, you know, some opportunities out there for agencies, if they don't want to develop within themselves to go a different direction. And there's always the, you know, sort of the conflict, you know, will they more likely go to a peer who is a part of my team, or go to a peer outside my team who understands the culture? And that's always a hit and miss. And I always say, you know, ask what your first responders would want. You know, that's all about employee engagement. You know, ask what your first responders want, and then develop a program based on what they want, as opposed to what leadership wants. And we're big into that. We're big into leadership engagement. That's how we do incident responses. We just don't run on and do an incident response. It's like, well, before we come on site, why don't we have, you know, your leaders, and we'll train you on the questions to ask and round, and ask your officers, ask your first responders, what is it that they want and need, and when would they like them to come? And then we'll customize it and base what they need, as opposed to what leadership wants. And so that's an important piece in both leadership management, incident responses, but also developing programs that are based on the needs of, you know, of the officers. But that's
So
a different direction I went. Sorry, I went.
no, it's okay. You sparked a question. Do you feel, where do you think the trust breaks down within departments? Do you think it breaks down at a leadership level, or do you think it's a peer level? Like, where do you think that trust, where do these myths get started? I guess I know your analogy of the phone tag is part of it, but is it the fear of it getting to leadership, or what?
I don't know. I just think, again, I go back to my father when I decided not to be a Mountie and to go into the field of psychology, and he thought I was going to the dark side. I think there's a genuine mistrust
Yeah.
with the mental health professionals within the law enforcement community, not necessarily the first responders. I think when I think of the firefighters I worked with, there seems to be a little more trust with the law enforcement community. I think there's just a level of distrust. And if you just make one error, one mistake, that is, you're not going to get that back.
Yeah.
And so I think it's culturally, I think that's part of it. It takes a while to develop trust within a group. And then if you have someone who's very vocal, who had a bad experience with an EAP, and maybe that bad experience was a situation that happened in which a chief or a leader got involved, in which they had to use the EAP in a disciplinary way, which I don't recommend, but sometimes individuals use it in a disciplinary way. And that situation goes awry. Again, the EAP is given a bad term. I think, I think when it comes to law enforcement, boy, it's being able to look at the EAP not as a tool of management, but a tool for the associates to use to get the skills they need to effectively manage and do their extremely stressful job.
Yeah.
And over, the years in EAPs and law enforcement, sometimes it's been used as a tool of management, as a punishment tool. Okay, you messed up. You said this, you're going to go to the EAP. I'm going to make it mandatory that you go to the EAP. Or because of what you said, we're going to go this direction. And then the EAP is saying, well, I don't know about that. I need to send them to a fitness for duty. And then,
Yeah.
and then
It's like sending your kid to, when they get in trouble, to go in their room and read, and then as they become adults, they associate reading with being in trouble. So then they don't like reading. It's like, that wasn't the point. It was just to get you to calm down and focus on something else. But yeah.
So
What are
it's
your thoughts on the EAP utilizing it, since these, you get a certain amount of sessions a quarter, a year, using those and normalizing that, having leadership say, okay, we've got the EAP, I'm just going to use 5 sessions as an example. You've got 5 sessions. Take the opportunity at no cost for you to have a conversation every 3 months. And that way, when the time comes, you've already built those tools subconsciously. You've got those tools already built where maybe that critical incident will not affect you the way that it would have if you had not been already making this normal in your life.
Yeah, we have a police department out in we'll just say Durango, and a really good chief who's very pro EAP and pro behavioral health. And so what we do out there is we're doing a pilot project in which you're an officer out there. You can do a mental health, get a mental health checkup or a wellness checkup, scheduled with the EAP, and you get 2 of them. And if you do that, then you get a day off. If in doing that, and all it is a checkup that you can come in and connect with the EAP person, see how you're doing. It's confidential, and then they get the day off. And then they can come back again in another, 6 months and do a follow-up. That has been an amazing program. Our utilization with police officers has gone out the roof because, again, it's very non-stigma. It's very proactive. Right. It's getting them in and comfortable with a counselor, getting them to see the counselor that I use has experience in working with law enforcement, and so getting to say, hey, this is a pretty normal person, and I like this person, and so they even continue. We have a significant amount, not only who do that, but also continue with that counselor if they feel they need to. So I think proactive programs for behavioral wellness checks are so effective, I think, for police departments to be able to have, in which they can learn about the EAP, they can understand it, they can get that wellness check, and if they need to, they can develop skills in which they can learn to be more, increase their resilience of all the stressors and issues that they have to handle with on a day-to-day basis. It is so hard being an officer now. It's so hard being a first responder. It is difficult, and so this is just a strategy that we've used that has been successful down in Durango anyways.
We're so excited to be able to start our day with Badge Brew Coffee. Hey, Robyn, did you know they take a green coffee bean and roast them to a rich and delicious brew?
I did. And Christy, did you know that Badge Brew is first responder family owned? So whether you're on day shift, night shift, or the shift of raising your family, Badge Brew will always have your coffee ready and waiting.
Let me ask you, what's your badge of honor? Find out by going to badgebrewcoffee.com.
All right, well, welcome back. I grabbed my Badge Brew coffee because caffeine is important for me, especially for today. It's important for everybody in my life, really.
Especially
keeps them
today,
safe.
especially every day.
True facts, true. So with that being said, life is stressful. Have a cup of coffee. No, seriously, the municipalities, often the police departments, the fire departments are lumped in under the municipality, especially here in Illinois. We have a lot of, village managers that make all the decisions. Making it normal across, in my mind, if they provide these options for which we know the EAPs are provided for everybody, but provide hey, let's do this every couple months, use your EAP across the board, that's going to potentially normalize it as well. Have you seen any changes like that with municipalities doing that?
I think municipalities depends, but some municipalities have really good champions and really marketing and pushing the EAP. So they push it in their communication on their intranet. They push it when it comes to if the EAP has an app. They make sure that the app is accessible again on their intranet, in which they can scan a code and put on their phones. They usually have champions within each one of the different departments. And municipalities typically have a wellness committee in which all the different vendors get together on a quarterly basis and talk about how they can support that municipality, and in which also it's usually run by HR, in which they talk all the vendors and make sure all the vendors are playing nicely in the sandbox. And so those are important. And if they don't happen in municipalities, they're important to happen because that's how the vendors can talk to each other, and also how you can continue to get more people involved, in which you can get the word out regarding all the different services.
So it's interesting that you said the intranet. So for those who don't understand that, that's the municipality's server or software that they can only access. Now in my mind, instantly, I'm like, there will be no cop that will sit there and put their phone to that QR code on the intranet, because then there's IT people that will be able to see that you've done that. Are those only accessible for them on that server, or are they given an opportunity to, if you know who your EAP is, ABC EAP, again, total made up. So if there's one out there, sorry, you never know. But can you access that through their website then off your intranet?
Yes, because the EAP typically has their own website. So again, like us, we have our own website that you can click on the different municipalities' website and take a link and go directly to our website, or you can just go directly to the EAP's website, in which on that website you can access all the information that you need. You should be able to, again, register online and get an appointment other than calling the 800 number, or you can get the 800 number, or you can download the app, or you can schedule for a webinar, or you can schedule for a counseling appointment. So most EAPs, again, have a pretty integrated website, independent of the intranet of the city. The goal is getting that information into the hands of all in the municipalities, everyone in the municipalities, so they know how to do that. It's done in health fairs. It's done with champions, with different police and fires departments. They usually have peer groups and make sure that it's in the hands of all the peer groups or the chaplains. And so again, that they have access to that. And then other things that you do within municipalities to make sure folks understand the EAP and the usage of it. There's trainings for managers as to how to use the EAP. There's trauma-informed leadership, one of the trainings in which managers are trained as how to recognize individuals and how to approach them in a caring and empathetic way. So those things also are ways besides the internet, tangible pieces of paper or flyers or whatever that the peers have, but also the different trainings that are done, either on site or through webinar for leaders and employees, in which again get the word out about the EAP. Municipalities with their EAP should have a detailed marketing plan as to how they market and push out the EAP. So individuals are aware of it and all the different ways that they can access it. So that should be a standard part of a pretty progressive EAP within the municipality. Have that
Do
market.
you feel like the newer generations coming in, the millennials and the Gen Zs, that they're more open to, because of their aptitude with technology mainly, but also, once again, coming off the pandemic, getting into the workforce, that they are more open to talking about mental health and utilizing these tools?
Yeah, they've been good. They've been helping break down those barriers.
Yeah.
They're much more inclined to access the EAP. They're much more inclined to try to change that culture of, hey, you really can benefit from talking to someone. So it has been a good benefit with that group coming into the force. That's been advantageous. But it's also interesting. I always would assume that they like our telehealth and our texting and chatting and all the different formats. But they'll say, hey, I'm on my technology all the time. I want a face-to-face person.
Wow.
I love to hear that.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense.
No.
I would think we have all these other options and you still want face-to-face.
But sometimes I think when you're a visual person, it's going to mean more because they do know the facilities of social media. And if you're face to face, it is more real. It hits home more. That's good that we're raising them that way, breaking that cycle.
I know.
There's so many different complexities and layers of that. Can a webinar be taken by any employee, or is it a free webinar to learn more, so that if I'm sitting here wanting to learn more and I'm having conversations with people about having conversations, I can then educate myself more on what my EAP does for us.
Yeah. So when it comes to training, so there's a continuum of different options you have for training. So webinars, most EAPs just have a standard webinar, either monthly or bi-monthly, that all companies can sign in and go in and watch. And then live, and then they should be able to access it later on in the recorded version. But then companies also have the option of, they have so many free hours, and so there's usually a pool of hours that they have, in which it can be a customized webinar specific to them, in which the EAP would either do it via webinar or come on site and do a webinar based on an issue that they would like to have addressed. Dealing with change, coping with trauma, self-care, resilience, stress management, those types of things that can be customized to that individual group. And that would be different. I would do a totally different, training for a group of law enforcement professionals than I would do for fire professionals, that I would do for surgeons, that I would do for nurses. And so they would have to be customized based on that need. So it depends. But most companies, again, with their EAP, they have those options.
It makes me think of an IEP, the individual education programs. It could almost be your IRP, your individual resiliency program. So you have it all set and ready and utilizing it, based on you or your job to fit your needs. So that's I like the way that sounds.
Yep.
And I can tell you, even in my own job, I don't, here's an EAP option. And, from the PD, I don't think that ever came home. I know we had one, but I would have to call HR to get it if I wanted to utilize it then, because I had no information on it and he wasn't going to bring it home.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah, same with Eric. Yeah. I mean, that's part of the problem, and we've talked about that in other podcasts, that the families don't receive any of this information, like nothing. I didn't even know how to get a hold of him at work most of the time, besides his cell phone. So,
You
So to
know,
overcome something like that, can the EAP suggest on the, I'm going to say City of Plainfield or Village of Plainfield, because that's what's in the top of my head, the Village of Plainfield website, can they, is there, or I feel like they should have an option of, this is the EAP that we use. Do they, and that then it's accessible to family who it's not going to come home to most of the time.
mhm. They can, because most of they can click on that, and then they can go right to the EAP website, and then there's usually a password, and so, so the public wouldn't get that. That password would come from the municipality. The other thing is, and this will sound a little old school, but it's it's one of the things that we did a lot during the pandemic, is send postcards in the mail,
Yeah,
to homes that has, hey, this is your EAP, this is your website, this is how you access it, really basic. And so family members know how to access the website and get to it outside of the workplace. You just don't send those postcards during the time that elections are, because people are usually just
you'll just dump them. Yeah,
be strategic when you send those postcards.
very
and
true.
don't text it.
Yeah.
I think I've gotten about 15 texts just yesterday from political texts. How they even got my number, obviously through the voting, through the city and my voting card or whatever. But oh my gosh, I'm so glad that my phone has not been off the hook today.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that's actually kind of a good segue, because often I think we think, politics plays such a huge role in bills that are being passed for first responders and people in general. But politics does not need to play a role in your EAPs and how your department or your municipality takes care of their employees. That comes from leadership. And leadership, in my mind, a good leader, they might not necessarily agree with it, but if they see it working, they should make sure that they are given everything to do so. Do you see a lot of leaders that have stopped that EAP or not had any interest in really understanding the EAP? Or are we finally out of that mindset that people are asking more questions?
Yeah, I think people are asking more questions. I think, slowly, I think if there's anything positive that came out of the pandemic, is like mental health has moved up to a little higher on the, people see that that's an important piece, and leaders see that because employees are asking for that. And so I think that that's a good thing. And I think how leaders respond when an associate comes and talks to them is so important, that they don't minimize, they don't rationalize, they listen. I call it LERFing. I use this term called LERFing. Listen, and then use empathy, and then reflect, and then follow up. So if a leader LERFs and shows the person that they heard them, and then, gives them the options of either a peer or an EAP, that can be effective. But if the leader just discounts them or disqualifies them, or says, just, buckle it up, whatever, then that's just creating the stigma. The more leaders can embrace, individuals getting help and support proactively, and they can be on board with that, I think the more that we're going to have more success, and less challenges with individuals who don't get help until they tap out and now they're so far gone, or individuals who unfortunately, go into that addiction cycle, or the depression, suicidal cycle, or some of those pieces that are just, they're in the red, as I would say. We use this thing called the stress continuum, and they're in the red. You need to be able to be more proactive and do that. And that's how we listen as leaders and support our employees and offer them assistance.
And it's
Yeah.
hard to not react when when you're feeling the same thing, when you're going to a leader, somebody, and they're feeling the same thing. It's extremely difficult not to react, knowing that it's even more personal, but to make sure that you are using those tools of, taking a breath before you respond, so that you're acting or reacting appropriately to help them.
Perfect, Christy. You'd be a good peer coach, but it's
Thank you.
exactly that. It's being authentic, it's being genuine, it's thinking before you say things, and then just being real. I mean, that's such an important piece as a leader. You don't have to fix the problem, you just have to listen and validate. That's what's needed. Listen and validate, and boy, that trust is going to develop. That psychological safety is going to develop. They should do that with your staff, and more inclined to get that individual the support that they need if that's what's needed. But just a kind, empathetic listening ear, I think, is an important piece of what leaders can do, and either do what they're doing now or do differently than what they're doing.
And I think too, to add on to that, being open about any mental health struggles that they have, but as well as just staying on top of their own mental health. I have I don't know if it was on one of our shows or someone outside told me that there is a fire chief close to where I live here that he actually has on his public facing calendar when he goes and has his check-ins. Like, that's how open he is about it, so that he's relatable. If someone comes to him with an issue, they know that, well, he also is taking care of his health in various ways. So you have to be able to relate and know. I mean, that's what First Help is all about too, right? Like, we support each other because we know that we've all been through something similar. So
Yep, and that's that empathy, right? You connect with something deep within yourself, that then you can, reflect back to that individual, and because that's how that individual could be feeling too, and then you connect, and then you validate.
Right.
That's that empathy, as opposed to the sympathy, which is disempowering. So I think that's such an important trait, as a leader, as a peer, to be able to do. That is a vital connection. Leaders play a big role when it comes to decreasing stigma, when it comes to helping individuals, and setting the tone. And I also love what both of you said. You've got to take care of yourself first too. So if you're not in a good space, then either get yourself into a good space, or maybe have someone else who you trust, follow up with someone who you think is struggling, because needing to be in a good space is important, so your issues aren't reflecting on the other person.
Right.
I tell my peers all the time, if you make it about you, it's not good. It's never about you. It's curiosity about the other person.
And I think there's a note for that, taking care of yourself ahead of time. But sometimes you have somebody come in, sit down, and you are not mentally prepared to take in, because you have not self-cared or whatever that looks like. You have not prepared yourself to take all that. Make sure that you take that moment after, whether it's off shift, whether it's close the door, go for a walk to get a cup of coffee, badge brew perhaps, but no. But make sure you do that, because that has happened where people have come into my office, shut my door, and I was in the middle of my day and they needed to talk, which is fantastic. But then I'm like, oh, wow, I wasn't prepared for that. I got to go do something for me, so I don't carry that with me as mine.
And that's part of being a leader in general. I just feel like a lot of these departments, they promote people, and not that people that are firefighters or police officers that are doing the work can't do the other side of it, but it's a very different job when you get into leadership roles anywhere. You're not doing the job anymore. You're taking on hats of being a mental health you're everyone's therapist, you're everyone's CFO, you're running a business at this point. So you have to be prepared to take on all of those roles. And part of it is making sure if you're going to be someone's therapist and this doctor, you have to take care of yourself too. So you don't take on all of that energy, that people are pouring onto you.
And I think where individuals get stuck in that, or leaders get stuck, is they try to fix, or they try to diagnose, or they try to play that doctor. And we tell them all the time, we don't need you to do that. All we need you to do is be curious and try to understand where the person's coming from. So trying to understand, you're listening with curiosity as opposed to listening with fix.
Right.
A lot of individuals who are in leadership, they're so trained to listen to fix.
Yeah.
So they have that fixing, and it puts a lot of pressure on them. So I say, take the pressure off. In this, you're just doing a peer-to-peer. All you're doing is you're listening to understand. You're listening to validate. You're listening to reflect. And that's your goal, not to fix. You want to make sure that they feel heard. And as you do that, you're not going to get in trouble of trying to give solutions or trying to diagnose and say, okay, I think you're depressed or anxious, in which people on the legal and HR side don't like that to happen, because then you put someone into an ADA category. And so it's how you can listen with curiosity as opposed to listening to fix. And it's harder to say than it is to do. That's the key for leaders.
I like that.
I like that. Listen for
Yeah,
curiosity.
I know.
I was writing it
write that
down as opposed to listen to fix.
That's like a life skill, not just a leadership skill. Listen
Right.
for curiosity.
That's an aha moment. Aha, that makes so much sense. It's like I'm listening to you, but I'm also hearing you.
Mm-hmm.
It does take the pressure off of you, because it's like, of course I'm going to listen to you.
Right.
I don't have to respond to you with a solution. And it is really about just talking stuff through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Giving them a forum for them to talk in a psychological safe space.
Yeah.
And as you do that, then they trust you more too, because they feel heard. A lot of people just don't feel heard. And so this is a way to feel heard. That's one of the dirty secrets we have as mental health professionals, because one of the things that almost always when someone comes into my office and talks to me, they go, wow, this is the first time I felt heard. And I didn't do anything. All I did was reflect and show that I'm listening and use my active listening skill. That's all I did. I didn't do anything else.
You didn't have a wall up, that stern feeling of I'm protecting myself from it. So yeah. Well, Cal, thank you so much for joining us today. We won't take up any more of your time, although I think we could probably talk about this for hours.
Yeah.
Is there a place, I know you work for, this is where I'm probably going to mess up, Centura Health?
Centura.
I was going to say it that way. Is there a contact that if a municipality, a department is interested in looking at you as an EAP, how can we have them reach you?
Probably the best way. I mean, you can go to the Centura website and search for profile EAP. You could do that, or you can just go to www.profileeap.org. So that's our website, and it'll have information as to an 800 number that you can ask, and they can just say, I like to talk to Cal, because my employees don't call me Dr. Parie's either. I only use that strategically when I need something done.
I get that. Don't you know who I am?
You know somebody else whose name shall not be named that does that.
Yes. Don't you know who I am? See what I have? No. Get it done now.
Yeah.
I'm called mom for a reason. No. Anyway, we appreciate it. And I think our big takeaways are EAPs are not out to get you.
They're not the enemy.
They're not the enemy. Yeah. And it's okay to vet them out and make sure that you utilize them in a way that sets you up for success prior to needing help. and making it easier along the way. Normalize using your EAP.
Okay.
So thank you, Cal. You have a wonderful rest of your week. And it's gloomy here. It's going to get to be 36 on Saturday.
Ooh.
I know. So enjoy the nice weather out your way.
Will do. Thank you all.
Thank you so
you.
much.
Yeah.
It was wonderful meeting you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.